Good afternoon, my name is Michael Fowler and I'm here to present our group task, our group report. The aim of the report is to assess the level of non-financial reporting by listed ASX companies, which is our part 1, and also to confirm that listed construction companies that utilise non-financial disclosure statements perform better than those that remain quiet, which is part 2. And to further the positive correlation between non-financial parties, which is generally speaking the focus of sustainability, and the overall financial performance of listed construction companies, which is our part 3. Listed companies are used because the data is obtained through publicly accessible balance sheets and disclosure statements. By first compiling non-financial reports and rating companies on this basis by their ESG scores, which is environment, social and governance, and cross-referencing these ESG scores with the financial performance of the corresponding companies. A correlation between non-financial statements and financial performance can be confirmed and further debated as to whether investors are attracted to those companies that foresee the need for sustainability. I'll now delve into part 1, our results. So, as was outlined above, part 1 of the report sought to determine the level of non-financial reporting in Australian publicly listed construction companies. Vector distance calculations were used to compare 9 elements based on non-financial reporting with the guidelines set for these elements by the FSC and ASCI. The results are shown in the table within the report, and as can be seen in that table, the level of non-financial reporting was predominantly poor, and there was 0% that met the guidelines used for their excellent reporting. Part 2 results. This part of the report aimed to comparatively analyse the financial performance of companies with good levels of non-financial reporting with the financial performance of companies that had poor levels of reporting. Financial performance was based on an array of financial ratios and calculations. The table below, as referenced from the report, states these ratios and representative companies do not disclose non-financial reports, and those that do not are shown with NR, and those that do are shown with R. For the ease of understanding, we, throughout our report, highlighted these and show where R outperformed NR companies, and NR companies that did get outperformed by R companies in a vast majority of the financial calculations performed in the report. So that's part 3 totally done.
Hi guys, my name's Damien and I'm here to discuss an aspect of part 3 of the report. This part of the report sought to use correlation coefficients to confirm the positive correlations of the calculations done in part 2 with the company's given performances in non-financial reporting. The results are shown in the table within the report. Again, positive correlations have been highlighted green and negative red. It can be clearly seen that red and green perfectly weigh themselves equal, and hence the report failed to show any substantial trend between reporting non-financial information and the better financial performance of a company. Assessment discussion. In this report, a number of assumptions were made and factors overlooked. A number of these are discussed below. Sample size, poor correlation, high error factor. In this report, there were 44 construction companies that were used to obtain data. As was stated in part 3, the positive and negative correlation values perfectly outweigh themselves. If this is not enough to discount the results, then the small sample size and poor correlation can be coupled with the fact that a sample size N of 44 construction companies can be used to have an error in correlation values of 0.141. Completely ruins the values obtained by this report. I'll now be discussing a complete lack of well-reporting companies. As was outlined in part 1, none of the 44 construction companies were found to have excellent reporting, and only 9% were found to have good reporting by this article. This again proves that any correlation found in part 2 and part 3 are looking for correlations between factors that are not themselves strong, because such an overwhelming amount of data was used for non-reporting companies. An example of the error in this survey was used to determine boys or girls were better at climbing trees, and 91 boys were involved in the race versus only 9 girls. This data would clearly not hold true.
Hi, so I'm Nick, so I'll be concluding this report, discussing final topics within part 3 and then therefore referring back to part 1 and 2. So when we look at if investors would care for companies to engage in non-financial reporting, again we'll relate to part 1 where very few companies have reported on non-financial practices, roughly about 9%. If this is the case, it may be that the report is looking for a correlation that does not exist, because if so few companies deemed it necessary to engage in sustainable practices and the like, then there's a strong possibility that the investors share this disregard. If investors cared for this, it would be assumed that more than 9% of companies would engage in these practices. Then we look at if reporting companies are performing well or well-performing companies reporting. So in the report itself, we mentioned that it is made to a school of thought that claims sustainable practices are deemed to be an extra financial burden. But if not, that is the reason why investors are not interested in backing the companies and occupying themselves with sustainability. It could also be the fact that investors aren't interested in the companies and that the report for non-financial information, but that if the well-performing companies that have an extra capital to be able to diversify their reporting with reports on sustainable and the likes. Moreover, it can be assumed that bigger companies have more pressure to put on them to disclose such information, and there's also bigger companies usually outperform smaller companies. So just to conclude the report, having examined the results of this report, as well as detailing limitations with these obtained results, it is obvious that no definite trends have been found in this report between the level of non-financial reporting of Australian public listed companies and their financial performance. The low level of non-financial reporting in Australia was found, and this result in itself inhibited the results for the rest of the report. Moreover, error due to the small sample size further lessens the already marginal trends found between non-financial reporting and performance. In conclusion, the general principles of this report may have merit, undergoing socially responsible practices in order to enhance the public image of the company, but the report does not distinctively prove that this result in better performances of a company of the ASX.